Welcome back to Into the Abyss. So we've got some video recommendations for you. Depending on how long-winded I am, we may split this up into two videos. Actually, you know what? Why don't we have Chuck go? Are you prepared to go first, Chuck?
Okay. I will go first.
Okay. Why don't you go first? Because we already know how long-winded I am. Chuck, why don't you go first with your streaming recommendations for us?
So I'm going to recommend comedies for horror fans. I'm being very specific on the title here because it's not necessarily comedy horror, which is a genre, but these are, I would say, comedy series or movies that most horror fans would appreciate on some level. My number five, and I would say there's not necessarily a ranking here of top five. It's more of a logical order here. Number five is one that's probably well known. That's Tucker and Dale versus Evil. All of these are hilarious. This is a fantastic movie. What I love about Tucker and Dale versus Evil, if you haven't seen it, it turns the hillbilly horror tropes on their head. The rednecks are the sympathetic protagonists of Tucker and Dale versus Evil, and the aloof college kids are the ones that are, basically getting themselves killed. This is definitely a horror film in terms of the gore and the content that's there. All the typical tropes you see with the impalements and things like that, it's all there. But the reason behind it is what's twisted. And it's absolutely hilarious. It pays homage to hillbilly horror so well. The truly scary person is actually not Tucker and Dale, who are just trying to go out and renovate their cabin and go fishing. So it is fantastic. 2010. I saw this on Netflix. It's still on there today. So if you haven't seen it and you're a big fan of horror, Tucker and Dale versus Evil is hilarious. Army of Darkness is my number 4. This is a classic, absolute classic. This is I think it's part 3 of the Evil Dead series. A lot of horror fans are probably familiar with that. Evil Dead 1 and 2 are more traditional horror. There is some comedy that's in there, so it was there in the roots. But Army of Darkness, it took a left turn and it just laid into the comedy aspect. It was I believe it's directed by Sam Raimi. It stars the inimitable Bruce Campbell as Ash. He is fantastic. Bruce Campbell just takes up the scene wherever he is, even if he's just a bit character in the background. He's awesome. But it's part of the Evil Dead series, and Evil Dead is more traditional horror, out in the woods, out in a cabin. Army of Darkness takes things back to the Middle Ages, and it has some classic lines, like "Give me some sugar, baby," and "This is my boomstick." Most fans of horror are probably familiar with this. But if you haven't seen it, it pays to watch Army of Darkness. I will also say this. This goes for the whole list. If you've got people who are not necessarily fans of horror, but willing to watch something a little bloody, both Tucker and Dale versus Evil and Army of Darkness would be great to watch. If my wife, for example, is not a fan of horror. She doesn't like scary stuff. They have horror tropes in there, but it's really about the comedy. She loved Army of Darkness. She has not seen Tucker and Dale, but she thinks it's great. She's sat down and watched it multiple times. I've shown the movie to people who are not fans of horror. They love it as well. So if you're a horror fan looking for something to laugh at, but also to draw in some non-horror fans, really anything that's top 5 will be approachable by most. My number 3 is actually a cartoon series, and this is why I say it's not a horror comedy list. It's really comedies that are well appreciated by horror fans, and it's Gravity Falls. It's written and directed by Alex Hirsch. It's one of the most brilliant series I've ever seen. It's so well written, not just animated series in general. It's just incredibly smart. The humor is well written. The way it plays out with the timeline, it takes place over summer. The way that things that are in early episodes come back into later episodes is absolutely brilliant. This is one of the smartest series that's out there. It's also great for kids. And if you're a fan of shows like X-Files, Supernatural, Twin Peaks, this lays into that Northwest Pacific horror very well. It plays that out there. It is done in a kids series. It's available on Disney Plus right now. But even if if you're looking at it seeing it as a cartoon, it's hilarious. It's really well done. If you've not seen it, it doesn't even matter if you don't have kids. Watch it. It's hilarious. And my dog is now trying to bite his tail, and that's what the movement is. He's bumping into the computer. So, but Gravity Falls. Gravity Falls, by the way, stars Kristen Schaal, plays Mabel. One of the best characters ever written. I mentioned Kristen Schaal because she had a cameo in my number 2 recommendation, What We Do in the Shadows. I have not seen the original movie that it's based on, but the series right now is available on Hulu. It has writing and directing, I believe, by Taika Waititi, and I know he has a cameo in one of the episodes as well. What We Do in the Shadows, if you're not familiar with it, it's modern-day vampires that have moved into Staten Island to take over America. They moved in about a century ago. But at this point, they've only managed to conquer their street and half of Ashley Street. And they just basically settled in, got comfortable in Staten Island, and are just living out their days. Early on, one of their head vampires comes over from Europe, from the old country, and wants to see how they're doing in terms of taking over America. But it plays on so many vampire tropes and goes in so many fun directions. There's actually an energy vampire who lives with them, and he's a guy who's just very boring and just goes to offices and gets into long, boring conversations and draws energy out of people from dull conversations. And it's that guy who sits at the water cooler, and you're like, I don't want to talk to him. I don't want to talk to him. That's an energy vampire.
It's like The Office.
Yes, it is like The Office. It's shot as like a documentary style.
I hear Mark Hamill.
Yeah, you mentioned The Office. Yes, go.
I hear Mark Hamill's going to be on that.
He is. He's going to be in season 2. I saw that as well. There's so many great cameos. There's a late episode in the season where there's just, Paul Rubin and others are just appearing as vampires on a council. It's hilarious. It's one of the funniest shows I've seen. If you're a big fan of vampire stories, it plays on all the vampire tropes. It is absolutely well done. It is done in an Office style where it's a documentary. The cameraman and the boom operators get drawn into it as well.
Nice.
And I can't recommend it enough. I would say it's a more mature humor. I will say that, but it is so well done. And one big surprise for me is watching this is I see Matt Berry starring it, which is not a big name, but I see Matt Berry starring in What We Do in the Shadows. I bring him up because he's in my number 1 series, which is Garth Marenghi's Dark Place. That came out 2004 from the BBC. I first saw it on Adult Swim. It is currently available on YouTube. You can actually watch it for free. It's only 6 episodes, so you can watch it pretty quickly. So the thing with my dog is still biting his tail. He's right here in front of me biting his tail. And he's a corgi, so he's got like a tail this big, so it's funny. He's doing circles. Garth Marenghi's Dark Place. Picture like cheesy Stephen King style horror from the 80s. Terrible writing, terrible acting. It's not like the well-known movies or the well-known series like it. It's more like, okay, what else does Stephen King have available in the lesser-known titles? And we've got a budget of $100,000. What can we do? Garth Marenghi is supposed to be a comedic representation of a Stephen King persona. He's a blowhard. He thinks that what he's written and created is the finest television literature of all time. And the people around like this was experimental. People just don't understand it. That's why it didn't succeed as well as it should have. But it's just the intentionally terrible acting, the intentionally terrible special effects and script. It's just phenomenal. It does play on a lot of old 80s and early 90s horror tropes. It's just incredibly cheesy. So if you like bad cinema, this hits all the sweet spots. If you like to laugh at bad horror movies, this is a brilliantly done, intentionally bad horror film. A lot of intentionally bad horror, it feels like it. I'm not always a big fan of that just because it feels so fake. This is so earnest. It's so well done. And Matt Berry, who's in both series, is phenomenal as a straight man. Trying to just play along with what's going on. This is normal, but obviously we're watching it like this is not normal. And so I highly recommend those, and all of them, honestly, even if you're not a horror fan, a lot of stuff can be watched easily as well by those who, spouse or a friend who's not into horror but likes comedy, get them on board with this. So Tucker and Dale versus Evil, Army of Darkness, Gravity Falls, What We Do in the Shadows, Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, all recommended.
All right. So I'm not going to move into my recommendations. Mine are all on Netflix, and similar to Chuck, I've got a listing from 5 to 1. Doesn't necessarily indicate, people's tastes are so subjective, right? So I try to keep that in mind. Although I have to say for this batch, these 5 are much closer together, Okay, there's not a lot of difference between my 5s and my 4s, my 4s, my 3s. But these are all currently streaming free on Netflix. The first one is Malevolent, directed by Olaf de Fleur Johansson. So Malevolent takes
It's
Malevolent
not
takes
Johansson. How is that so hard, man?
it's Johansson. It's like um,
Scarlett Johansson.
Johannes, the son of Johan.
well, there's our
All right, let's
we
back
haven't
to
had
Johannes.
all
All
right.
right, sorry, Kevin. Sorry,
All right.
Kevin.
So,
Blooper reel.
Malevolent is a pretty classic story in its own way. You've got a brother and sister who are basically running a scam. They're pretending to be paranormal investigators, and the sister is pretending to be psychic. So, of course, they run, they're always doing the whole ghost hunting thing, going to places, pretending to cleanse it and exorcise it. Of course, the kicker here is the sister's mother was actually psychic. So she's using her mother's fame to run their scam, at the same time always being slightly afraid that she's actually going to inherit her mom's psychic ability. Boom, she does. And on their last scam case, she has a really disturbing vision that's real. And she realizes that I may have my mom's gift. So they get called out to a typical countryside British manor to exorcise some ghosts and things like that. And she's dealing with the fact that while the rest of the crew is pretty much, this is a theatrical production, we're just going through the motions, she realizes I'm starting to see things that are really there. And then boom, her brother, who's running the whole scam, because he owes money, basically, he starts having visions too. And it's a pretty decent film, It's one of those films that's it's really well done. I wouldn't say that the acting is superior, but it's certainly not inferior. And it's interesting. There's some interesting plot twists there as to who's responsible. Obviously, it's a manor where these ghosts of kids. This lady basically says the girls won't stop screaming. There's a plot twist there as to who's actually responsible for the kids that were murdered. But it's a decently done movie. It's really, I think, more about the girl realizing she has this heritage and she has to now accept it, when all this time she's been faking. So Malevolent, directed by Olaf de Fleur Johansson. Number 4 is The Heretics, directed by Chad Archibald. The Heretics is also a decent movie. There's a lot of horror films that are done by Uncorked Entertainment. You can tell you're watching an Uncorked Entertainment video where at the very beginning it has a wine bottle and goes bloop, and wine goes across the screen, Uncorked Entertainment. They've actually had some pretty decent offerings, some of them not so decent. This one's pretty good. It starts with a cult has kidnapped this middle school age girl, adolescent, and they're all killing themselves in the woods, sacrificing themselves, and they're going to end up sacrificing the girl to raise a demon. At some point, one of the cult members can go through with it and ends up freeing the girl, although she doesn't know this until later. She grows up into a teenager, and she's living with her girlfriend in a flat, and she gets kidnapped by this stranger. And at first, we're led to believe that this is the cult coming back for her to finish the job. What we end up finding out is the guy that kidnapped her is the guy who freed her 5 or 6 years ago, because he's you don't understand. You can't trust any of your friends. The cult is still there. They want you to become this demon. So basically you have them, and it's funny that you talked about the Evil Dead, Chuck, because the cabin in the woods all by themselves where terrible things are going to happen, this has become a bedrock cliche in the horror genre. Mm-hmm. So he basically chains her up in a cabin out in the middle of the woods because he's trying to keep her past the date when she's supposed to become a demon. Obviously, there's a little bit of tension that develops between the two of them, maybe a little Stockholm Syndrome, her not wanting to believe it. You know, there's some revelations about whether or not the people who she trusts are really her family or still part of the cult. And it's got one of those gotcha endings. I think, Tom, you called it a Bagul ending in one of our previous ones. But it's still a pretty decent film. The only problem is the gotcha ending. You're probably going to see it coming. Number 3 is I Am the Pretty Thing Which Lives in the House. Ooh. Now, this is a gorgeous, gorgeous movie. I have to say, I watched this movie for those of you that are familiar with the work of Keelan Patrick Burke. He's one of the best horror writers out there. And he's so strongly endorsed this movie, and I can see why. This is one of those movies where if you want to see entrails, you want to see heads chopped off, demons raping people, you know, this is not the movie for you. This is the definition of super slow burn, creeping atmosphere. And the atmosphere is gorgeous. Basically, it's directed by Oz Perkins, stars Ruth Wilson. She's a live-in nurse for a really famous gothic female horror writer. Like if Anne Radcliffe was writing today, like it's kind of like, you know, like an Anne Rice or a female Stephen King, and she's in her ailing years, her Alzheimer years, and Ruth Wilson plays a live-in nurse who's there all alone, taking care of her. And the movie just has such a hallucinatory effect because the idea is advanced for us that this house has always been haunted. And that's where this gothic horror writer got all of her stories. But then we're led to believe that there's this slippage between the ghosts that were haunting the house that inspired the horror writer herself, and their live-in nurse. This is a great movie. Some people will probably not be happy with the ending because it's a little one of those unresolved where you have to sit there and go, But it's just a gorgeous movie. So well done. So tense. Number 2, He Never Died by John Kowalski. Directed by John Kowalski, starring Henry Rollins. This one has been there on my queue for a long time. And I'm not going to lie, I'm like, Henry Rollins? Really? Like, I remember he was in Johnny
Rollins.
What's that?
I have a Henry Rollins poster in my bedroom.
Well, as an actor, like, do you guys remember Johnny Mnemonic? You ever see Johnny Mnemonic?
Never heard of it.
I've heard of it.
Oh, you should see it. That was Keanu Reeves doing The Matrix before The Matrix. He was in that. He kind of overacted a little bit. So I'm thinking, really? Henry Rollins? This was what I love about doing this streaming series because this was a great movie. Okay, let me lay this out for you. Henry Rollins is an immortal cannibal who is isolating himself from humans so he won't eat them. But then one of his ex-girlfriends basically says, hey, I'm sending your 16-year-old daughter that you gave me to you. You deal with her. And he gets dragged into the middle of a mob conflict. And, of course, he breaks his human fast by devouring one of the mobsters. It's a great movie. Now, I am going to say nothing else about this movie. Okay, other than the fact that there's some really good reveals about his immortal nature. And I'm going to stop there. All I will say is that his immortal nature is biblical in nature. And I wasn't prepared for that. And I was really surprised by that. And Henry Rollins really does a great job of delivering this nuanced performance of, here's a guy who's immortal. He likes to eat people. He knows this probably is a good thing. So I'm going to live by myself. I'm going to go to Mass every Sunday. The only social engagement he has is playing bingo every Tuesday night with 80-year-old old ladies. And he's got a guy who supplies him with blood from the blood bank. But he also is that grumpy middle-aged guy who suddenly finds out he has a daughter, and really he's kind of a dick, but he also has feelings. So he's trying to be like, oh shit, I'm kind of a dick. I've got a 16-year-old daughter, but I'm not a complete dick, so I can't just abandon her. So it really turns out to be a really great movie, like really, really entertaining. And I was super surprised when I finally watched this. So He Never Dies, starring Henry Rollins on Netflix. Number one is The Lodgers, directed by Brian O'Malley. This movie is like the epitome of cosmic horror with no hint of Lovecraft. It's an Irish Gothic film taking place, I want to say around World War I, about this brother and sister who live alone in their own manor. Their parents just ritualistically drowned themselves, left the manor to them. There's a family curse that dictates that they can never leave the manor. They can never leave the grounds of the manor. They can never be apart. They have to be in bed they have to be in the house by midnight every single night. And there's this idea that because the parents drowned themselves, there's this intimation of like water gods, and there's this deep. And this is the reason why I have this feeling that it's Lovecraftian and cosmic without being Lovecraftian. Under the manor, like in the first floor, there's this trap door that opens every night when the kids are supposed to be in their beds. And there's nothing but water down there. And something comes out of the water every single night. I won't spoil that. And of course, the one girl falls in love with a World War I vet who's got a prosthetic leg, and he's suffering from PTSD. And she wants a new life for herself. Whereas in The Brother, this is our family legacy. This is what they're supposed to do. And in true Gothic tradition, I'll give you exactly 2 guesses as to why the brother is so clingy with his sister. And it's not because he's an overprotective brother. But that's why there's a lot of Poe-like too. Because if you remember in the fall of the House of Usher, there's intimations that the Usher family line was weak. Code word for, yeah, they've been interbreeding and now they've got a pretty thin genetic pool. Well, that vibe is really strong here too. That brother and sister, their destiny is to, you know what, and have kids someday. And then they're supposed to go drive.
Breed.
What's that? Yeah, they're supposed
Breed, have babies.
Yep, with each other.
To the hillbilly one.
And their destiny is to eventually go drown themselves in the water, to sacrifice themselves to whatever water god they made a pact with, so then their kids are destined to stay at the manor and do the same thing. And of course, the daughter dares to fall in love with a World War I vet and try to break the whole thing. And the brother, at first, he comes across as loathsome and creepy, but you realize it's all he's ever known. This is the only thing he's ever known. So you gain a little sympathy for him at the end. So these are all on Netflix. Malevolent, The Heretics, I Am the Pretty Thing Which Lives in the House, He Never Died, and The Lodgers. So you should go out and check out both Chuck's recommendations and my recommendations to help ease your quarantine blues.